Hey guys, what's up? I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back here to No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and welcome to the end of the NFL regular season. In fact, welcome to Week 17, one of the craziest weeks, of course, every year in daily fantasy sports and NFL fantasy sports in general, simply because you have a lot of things going on. It's going to be a crazy week. We're going to talk about it. We're going to be playing some DFS, and in this video, we're going to talk about core plays as always. This is the DFS Slate Playbook for this upcoming Sunday's main slate, January 3rd, 2020, where we're talking both DraftKings and FanDuel, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. And in this video, we're going to break down which teams are in contention, which teams have something to play for, and how that affects daily fantasy sports and the players that you should be selecting for this upcoming Sunday's main slate. So sit back, relax. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Yo, hey guys, what's up, and welcome back to the channel here. Welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. As always, I thank you guys so much for tuning in to this particular video, but more importantly, thank you for joining if you've been here for most of the season, for the last couple of weeks, for all of 2020, whatever it is. I thank you guys so much. I know we're nearing the end of the season here. This is week 17 of the NFL season. Of course, this is the end of the regular season. This is the end of these larger slate DFS slates where, in fact, in this particular slate, it's probably the largest of the year. You can see here we have 15 total games on DraftKings available, on FanDuel available. Typically not that many. Typically it's around 12 or 13 games with the Thursday and sometimes the Saturday games and Monday games, but we have pretty much every single game on Sunday for this week 17. But of course, we have a lot of things to sort through. You have players sitting out, you have teams playing for something, you have teams not playing for anything, teams resting players. So we will talk about all of that here very shortly. But in general, thank you guys as always so much for being here, part of this channel, subscribing, all that goodness. If you haven't done so already, I'd still really appreciate it. I know this is week 17, but please make sure you do subscribe to the channel here at No Huddle Fantasy Sports. We are a small channel, but continue to grow, and it's because of you guys and your engagement here on the channel. So I thank you guys for this wonderful season, for all the growth that we have experienced, and for really a successful season and keeping this channel alive here. So thank you guys so much, as I just stated. But beyond that, as I mentioned, we are approaching week 17 here. In general, just to kind of give you a heads up, I will be putting out more content. This is not the end of NFL DFS for No Huddle Fantasy Sports for 2020. I'll do some playoff stuff, but it will taper down a little bit here. Of course, our main go-to here is main slate DFS, football DFS. We're not going to have that going forward. We will have some games, some 4 or 5 game slates, things like that. We'll talk about it. I'll put out some videos. I'll do some single game videos, some DraftKings showdown slates, things like that. But in general, again, thank you guys for the wonderful 2020 season. As we approach the playoffs here, let's tackle this week 17 the best we can. Let's talk about it, and let's basically end the regular season DFS slate on a bang here in week 17. But as I mentioned, we're talking 15 total games for an outlook on this slate. Likely from what I can remember, the largest slate overall for 2020. Week 17, of course, is an interesting slate as always. The best tool you can use outside of these videos, outside of the optimizers, the projections, stats, whatever you're looking up, the number one thing, the most important thing for week 17 is the news and updates that comes out literally hourly up until lock. So as I mentioned, you have a lot of teams not playing for anything, and that's both good and bad. So a good example would be Kansas City, right? They've locked in basically the number 1 seed, the first round bye. They're resting Mahomes. They're resting certain players, certain starters. So of course you're not going to play those particular players, but what does that mean from a defensive perspective? What does that mean from the opposing team's perspective? You want to consider all of that, but you also want to pay attention to other teams. The Buffalo Bills, for example, another AFC team that kind of has something to play for. That's that number 2 seed. If you see them in a blowout, maybe going to half up 14, you might start to see starters get rested. So very, very, very important. Bottom line is to make sure you stay up to date on the news, on the analysis. Adam Schefter, the guys that tweet out who's in, who's out. It's all going to be very, very important. And then couple week 17 with the simple fact that we're still dealing with, obviously, COVID-19. There's players going to be missing, and we'll talk about it week 17 for that reason. Not because they shouldn't be playing or not because they're rested because of, locking in a playoff particular spot, but because of that unusual, COVID issue that still is going around. So all of that is very, very important to Week 17. It's very important to DFS, and it's a very simple thing that does not take any talent, doesn't take any money, doesn't take anything at all except for a little bit of your time to make sure you are up to date and paying attention, and you will take a lead on 10, 15, 20% of the field simply by doing your due diligence. So I don't want to spend any more time on that than is needed, but that is the number one most important thing for this particular week of DFS football. Make sure you guys pay attention up until lock to who's in, who's out, and how that affects ancillary players, defenses, all that good stuff. As I mentioned here, optimizers can be used, but they cannot predict if someone's only going to play half a game. So again, a good example would be Josh Allen. If the Buffalo Bills are up 21, 28 points going into the fourth, going into the second half, if they've pretty much buried the team they're playing, you might see Josh Allen come out. You might start to see players play less snaps. So you can't predict that from an optimizer perspective. You can't just hit submit on the button. You have to understand what's going on and how these teams and how these coaches are mentioning players and how they will be played throughout the week. Again, several players are resting or are out. I'll list a few of them here in the next couple of minutes, but in general, it's up to you guys to make sure you stay up to date with that. There's a literal stable of running backs that are set to miss time this week, from Alvin Kamara to Murray, his backup, to just a number of other running backs that are going to be missing time. So there's going to be a lot of value on the slate, but we want to make sure we choose the right value in the right situations. Conservative play this week is important. You do have to take some risk. You want to know who's owned, how you can pivot, all that stuff, but not so much as other weeks. There's not, in my opinion, from my perspective, such an emphasis on lower owned guys taking a ton of risk. I'd rather know that my quarterback is going to play all game, all four quarters in a good spot, rather than taking a chance on a guy that could be rested in the second half, things like that. So again, up to you guys to make some of those decisions, but again, up to you guys to make sure you do your due diligence and pay attention to that. And last but not least here, pretty obvious, but it's important to state, stick to the players from teams that have something to play for. So the Ravens, the Colts, the Cleveland Browns, Seattle, Arizona, all kinds of teams are still in the hunt here. New Orleans, there's still teams, Green Bay, playing for the number one seed in the NFC. All of these teams do have something still to play for, whether it's a seed or it's actually locking in a playoff spot. You want to stick to players from those teams. Not that, teams that haven't locked players like Houston, they're going to play Deshaun Watson apparently all game long. You can go there if you know that, but in general, you want to make sure you go with teams that are playing for something. It's an easy way to make sure you are in the right spot this week. So a little bit longer on this slate outlook than we normally spend, but again, it's a weird week. Week 17 is similar to a preseason week. You just have to really do your research, do your due diligence, make sure you pay attention to who's in, who's out, and then take it from there. So be careful, and again, it's up to you guys to make sure you do that due diligence and pay attention up until lock. But moving on, as always, let's talk Vegas totals for this week. It's an unusual week. You only have, I think, three total games with over-unders above 50, 4 in total if you count 50. You can see here Atlanta at Tampa Bay at 50, Minnesota at Detroit at 54, Las Vegas at Denver at 50.5, and then to cap it off, you have Tennessee at Houston at 56. Beyond that, there are 6 total teams, a low number here, projected with 28 or more points, and only a few of them are actually above 30. So we like to target offenses with those high team totals. We like to target games with those high over-unders. There's not a lot of offerings this week. In fact, there are a ton of teams with 22, 21 or less points projected as an offense from Vegas. You can see Miami, New York Jets, the Patriots, the Steelers, the Giants, the Jaguars, Arizona Cardinals, Los Angeles Rams, Carolina Panthers, San Francisco 49ers, and something you don't see very often, Kansas City Chiefs. All of those teams are projected 22 or less points, several of them below 20 points overall. So in terms of a team stack, make sure you're careful with those particular teams. A lot of those are resting players, or one of those scenarios, like I mentioned, that you want to pay attention to who's in or who's out. So Vegas totals, that's what we're looking at for the week. Make sure you take that in. These will change as we get closer to lock, as always, but something to always, get started, get a good look at what's for the week ahead, which teams are in good spots, which teams are projected to score points, and that's what we're looking at for this week in terms of Vegas totals. Something I did a little bit differently this week is talk about who's in, who's out, in particular who is out. There is a nice list. Adam Schefter has posted it. This is not all comprehensive. It does not include every single player. It does not include linemen and players like that, which again, does matter if you're taking running backs behind offensive lines that don't have any starters playing. That's going to make a difference. But these are positional players that I do think are typically found in fantasy lineups, in DFS lineups, that I think are important here. I'm not going to go through this list. I'm not going to list every player here, but a couple of guys like Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, you can see Ben Roethlisberger, Alvin Kamara. These guys are not playing. Julio Jones, James Robinson, Miles Sanders. These guys are not going to play. They are confirmed out this week. Something to consider. Pause this video, take a look at this, make sure you're not playing any of these or not planning to play any of these players. And again, this is going to open up some value from their backups perspective. Maybe we want to go there. We want to only take value where it's actually going to pay off. Value is, not always where you want to go. If it's not truly value, you don't want to just take a backup because he's cheap. You want to make sure that he's in a good spot and he's actually going to perform and pay off and be a value. So we will talk about that. But again, this is the list I have for now. It should probably get longer as we approach week 17 here, but something to pause the video here and to consider. But let's get started here, as always, with quarterbacks. The two guys, I have really 4 guys that I am in love with this week, guys that I definitely will be playing. I'll talk about the other 2 at the end of this video, but the 2 I want to start with are Lamar Jackson and Kirk Cousins. Both of these guys are going to see lower ownership. Well, in general, I think across the board, because there's 15 total games, understand that ownership is not an issue this week, especially at the quarterback position. You can go with the highest owned quarterback, and he's probably going to be 15%. So that's not that bad. But in general, these guys are standing out to be very, very low owned compared to the field. First guy here is Lamar Jackson. He is $8,000 on DraftKings. A little bit of a typo there. There should be another 0. And he's $9,000 on FanDuel. I don't know how I deleted those 2 zeros, but just keep in mind, $8,000 on DraftKings, $9,000 on FanDuel. He's playing on the road at Cincinnati, 44 over/under. Baltimore is a significantly big favorite here at -13 with a 28.8 implied team total. So a very nice implied team total there for a quarterback for Lamar Jackson. But as I mentioned, -13 is not something we typically look at for quarterbacks, but I'm going there anyway this week. In general, Baltimore must win this game to make a playoff or give themselves a chance to make the playoffs this week. So they are all in it. I suspect Lamar Jackson is all in for this week. They're going to put the ball in his hands. Obviously, he's the quarterback, but they're going to really rely on him to do, I would imagine, most of everything. And if they're going to score 28.8 points, I believe Lamar Jackson is going to be having a big game, regardless of how big that number is in terms of a spread. He is the most expensive quarterback on the slate, but likely going to be one of the lowest owned, if not the lowest owned of those top salaried guys. Rodgers, who else is up there? Murray. Those types of guys are going to be higher owned. Deshaun Watson, then Lamar Jackson. Again, Baltimore in a must-win game here. He gives you that elite upside each and every week. He's been performing better and better as the season progresses. In fact, the last couple of weeks of the season here, he's been at his best, which is what we want. He has an elite floor, as always, with his rushing ability. The good news is he's been rushing the ball more and more as they approach playoffs. I don't know if they were playing conservative or trying to rest him early on. Obviously, they dealt with a lot of delays, a lot of postponements, a lot of rearrangement of games. They're kind of coming into their own here. Baltimore is one of the better teams in the AFC, in my opinion. They just had a little bit of a difficult schedule here. But Lamar Jackson is playing better, is rushing the ball a little bit more. What we want out of him is finally coming to fruition here towards the end of the season. And if you look here, no less than 22 fantasy points over his last 4 games. In each of those games, he's had no less than 22 fantasy points. Obviously, he has scored more than that in certain games. But in general, that's the floor you're getting here. That's what we want in a week 17 where there's so many questions, ands, ifs, all those types of things present. We want that guy that's going to give us a very consistent, solid floor with big elite upside. Lamar Jackson does that here in week 17. He's averaged 11 plus rushing attempts over those same last 4 games. Again, something I wanted to mention is that he's simply running the ball more towards the end of the season, the last quarter of the season, than he had earlier in the season. Something we do want. That's what we expect when we're going to pay this much money for Lamar Jackson. And then other ancillary things I think are very important here. The offense and defense aligned pass advantage for Lamar Jackson for Baltimore sitting at plus 25%. What does that mean? He's simply going to have time in the pocket, time to run the ball should he want, and time also to sit back there and find somebody like Marquise Brown or Mark Andrews down the field if he needs to. He should have little issue in terms of a pass rush, in my opinion, and the numbers kind of show that here. And then last but not least here, I did mention, again, just to kind of reiterate that point, Cincinnati's pass rush grade for the season is 31st overall according to Pro Football Focus. So really, really bottom of the barrel there for a pass rush. Lamar Jackson, he's going to have his way in my opinion. The only downside here is if, again, they get out to a huge lead and for some reason they rely purely on Gus Edwards, purely on J.K. Dobbins. But I really still think it's going to be Lamar Jackson's show. I think he's motivated here. I think Ravens are motivated here to really put the stamp down that they are the Ravens of last year still and that they deserve a playoff spot. So I do really like Lamar Jackson. I like the fact that he's going to be lower owned. You're going to be paying a little bit of money here, but the Marquise Browns and the Mark Andrews, stacking those guys with him do kind of alleviate the overall salary expenditure on a stack. I do like Lamar Jackson. If you're looking to come down in price here, my favorite lower price guy is Kirk Cousins. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, $77 on FanDuel, playing on the road here in Detroit, a 54 over-under. We really like that number there. Minnesota is a -7-point favorite, so a pretty big favorite on the road here with a 30.5 implied team total. So all those numbers are really, really good outside of the fact that they're 7-point spread favorites. But my opinion here is that doesn't matter. The only way they're going to do anything, in my opinion, is through the air, and that's why I like Kirk Cousins this week. He's the highest projected team total on the slate, so we know points will be scored or are projected. A really good chance of being scored by this team here. And then, as I mentioned, I think they're going to pass the ball a lot simply because Dalvin Cook has been rolled out. Obviously, one of the best backs, if not the best back in football in 2020. They rely heavily on Dalvin Cook. They're a very run-oriented first offense, at least when they things go to plan here. But this week, Dalvin Cook is going to be out. So if you want to look back, if you go back to week 16, the only other week that Dalvin Cook truly missed and was rolled out, you saw Kirk Cousins have a 330-yard passing performance with 3 touchdowns. Hopefully we can get that again here at $6,300, 77 on FanDuel. That's a really, really good payoff, a really good value salary if we're going to see that heavy volume passing attack. I think he offers value at a salary with those things considered. Week 9, he played the same Detroit team at home. Didn't have the greatest in terms of yards, 220 passing yards, but he did have 3 touchdowns. So again, we've seen him have success, A, without Dalvin Cook, where he has had to throw the ball a lot, and B, against the same team earlier in the season. So all things point up here for Kirk Cousins, in my opinion. Again, I'm really, really on this play simply because Dalvin Cook is going to be out, and I believe they're going to have to rely on the pass here on the road more. They're playing inside in Detroit in a dome, so there's no weather issues or anything like that. More so, we saw Madison. I hope a lot of ownership goes to him. I will not be playing much Madison, if any at all. He had a really, really bad game when Cook was out. He really did absolutely nothing. In addition to that, he's actually been banged up. I believe he's missed a couple of games over the last few. So I believe they're going to have to go to the air. It's that simple. I don't think they're going to have much of a running back presence or going to be able to do much on the ground, even though Detroit does struggle versus the run. I'm going to rely on Kirk Cousins and him getting the scoring done through the air here. A couple last things I will point out. It is a cake matchup. Detroit's secondary is graded dead last in football. Their pass rush is still bottom 10 also, 21st overall. So he should see a lot of time in the pocket here without much of a pass rush. And Detroit, one good thing here is they allow the second most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. So the numbers, in addition to everything I had mentioned, the numbers still also point to this being a great spot for a quarterback for someone like Kirk Cousins. He has elite weapons in Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. I really, really like Kirk Cousins at a value play here at the prices I mentioned. Moving on to the running back position here, I'll give you 2 guys very quickly, Austin Eckler and DeAndre Swift. Austin Eckler stands out to me, again, as a guy I don't think very many people are going to be playing. The only scare here before we get started on him is if they will rest him, simply because they aren't playing for anything. They're playing Kansas City. They're on the road. Austin Ekeler is a part of their future. He's been banged up this year. Are they going to rest him? Everything I've looked at says no. I think they're going to continue to play and play competitively here with Herbert and Ekeler and everyone else in the lineup. They're going to be missing players simply because of injury already, such as Keenan Allen. I'm relying on Ekeler playing a full game, but if you see anything, you're going to want to check this. If he should miss time or split carries to kind of alleviate some of the workload on him, obviously this play is going to come way down the list. But as of now, assuming Austin Ekeler is full go, gets a full workload, I really, really like him at $7,500 on DK and $77 on FanDuel. I mentioned he's playing on the road here in Kansas City with a 43.5 over-under. The Chargers, you're not going to see this very much, are favorites in Kansas City at -5 with a 23.8 implied team total. Decent road favorite here that always favors running backs, or is a good indicator for a running back, but it's more than that for Ekeler here. We know Keenan Allen's going to be missing. Keenan Allen, the wide receiver for the Chargers here, has a 27% team target share. He's going to be out of the lineup, so I believe more targets are going to be funneling towards Ekeler. By the way, also Hunter Henry is going to be out. That's nearly half of the team targets are going to be missing between those two guys. I just don't see how another 5 targets or more goes to Austin Ekeler. We've seen him have 10, 15 target games already. I think this easily could be one of those games. A really, really good play on DraftKings in my opinion. Should he get a full workload? That's the only concern, but I do believe that will happen this week. So the missing pieces of Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry are really the big reason I like Austin Ekeler this week. But more than that, Kansas City does struggle versus the run. In week 2, Austin Ekeler did play. He had his best rushing performance in terms of total yards versus Kansas City. Kansas City just generally is not very good against the run, just how it plays out throughout the season. We're in week 17. These numbers are what they are. You can definitely attack Kansas City on the ground. More than that, Kansas City is resting their starters. I mentioned they're weak versus the running back. They're allowing 4.6 yards per carry. That's bottom 10 in the league. Their rushing defense also great at bottom 10 in the league, 22nd overall by Pro Football Focus. And they're allowing right kind of in the middle of the pack here, 14th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So those numbers are good for a true running back. Austin Ekeler is more than that here. He's a guy that catches a lot of passes, is very involved in the passing game. And without the 2 big targets of Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry, I believe you're going to see more targets go to Austin Ekeler here from Justin Herbert. I really like Austin Ekeler. Again, the only disclaimer is if you guys don't believe he's going to get a full workload, if he's going to be rested, if Kelly's going to play more snaps, whatever it might be, maybe step down a little bit here. But for me, I do really like Austin Ekeler in week 17 here playing in Kansas City. The other guy I want to mention here is DeAndre Swift for Detroit. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, $7,500 on FanDuel, playing at home this week for Detroit versus Minnesota. 54 over-under in this game, so a very, very healthy, nice over-under. A lot of points to be scored according to Vegas. Detroit is a home underdog at +7 with a 23.5 implied team total. Now, I do believe this line will move. I think last I read that Matt Stafford is going to be playing this game, so Matt Stafford is a big boost for DeAndre Swift. It's also a big boost for the Kirk Cousins stack I mentioned earlier. In general, Matt Stafford just offers more, obviously, offense, more opportunity to score, more of this being a competitive game. I think Matt Stafford is a huge boost should he play. I can't imagine why he's playing, but I guess he's going to, and I think as soon as you see that get confirmed, this line will probably move a little bit in favor of Detroit a little bit more here. At least they won't be +7 point home underdogs versus Minnesota. But in general, DeAndre Swift is a play of mine that I'm definitely considering, especially as a run back player against that Minnesota Kirk Cousins stack. He's a good value play, especially on DraftKings here at $6,300. I love that price tag. Again, favorite run back player with that Minnesota, with that Kirk Cousins stack. Good things are shaping up here for DeAndre Swift. I think he's going to have a great 2021 season, so get ready for that. All you season-long players, I think he's a player to grab for sure. But in general, as the season has gone along, as the season has progressed, DeAndre Swift has picked up more and more snaps, more time. He did get a little banged up there around Thanksgiving, but in general, in week 16, we saw him come back with 68% of the snaps. We'd like to see that at 75% or more, but in general, 68 is a good number to see him playing, more than half of the snaps, a good majority of the snaps here. in that Detroit offense. Consistent usage, I think that's a big bonus for him that people are going or ignoring. They're just really not noticing. In the passing game, he's been really, really good. He's had 5 targets, a very consistent 5 targets in each of the last 5 games. You're basically guaranteed 5 targets from this guy. So if he gets 15 to 20 carries, you're basically going to get in total 25 opportunities out of a running back that's $6,000 on DraftKings. 5 of those being targets, 5 of those being the potential to get 1 point per reception. I love that for DeAndre Swift, especially playing at home here, even though he is an underdog. In general, other things that point to a good spot for him against Minnesota is the fact that he is the second highest offense-defensive line run block advantage at plus 64%. That's a really, really good number. If you don't know what that means, essentially, Pro Football Focus does a grading system, and they're assigning numbers to the offensive line and the defensive line, assigning grades. And what they're saying is the offensive line for Detroit is at such an advantage, a 64% plus advantage versus the D-line of Minnesota. So obviously that's a really, really good thing for DeAndre Swift, for any running back behind them in this matchup playing at home. More so, Minnesota's run defense is not very good. They're graded 26th overall by Pro Football Focus, and they're allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. So DeAndre Swift here listed and shown in an away jersey. Should be a home jersey, but doesn't matter. We're taking DeAndre Swift this week. Hopefully we'll be lower owned. I think he's in a great spot. Hopefully we get Matt Stafford to help him out a little bit here. But in general, I do really like DeAndre Swift at his price tag, especially on DraftKings. 2 wide receivers I want to mention, Justin Jefferson being the first. He's obviously going to be my favorite pairing because he's on this slide, because I'm talking about him. He's the guy I'm going to be pairing first with Kirk Cousins. But I do love Adam Thielen. I think he's also in a great spot. The guys are similarly priced here. Both of those guys likely will be in some of my lineups together with Kirk Cousins, but I will list to you Justin Jefferson as being my favorite. He's $76,600 on DraftKings, $8,000 on FanDuel, playing on the road here in Detroit. Basically everything I had just talked about in reverse. 54 over under. Minnesota is a big favorite at 30, with 30.5 as an implied team total. Hopefully we get Matt Stafford back, as I mentioned, to keep this game competitive, keep some points flowing here for both teams. But in general, we do like Justin Jefferson with Kirk Cousins. He's averaged 10 plus targets in over his last 5 games. That's an average target of 10 or more over those last. Really good numbers there for, I think, an elite receiver. This guy's going to turn into a really good receiver, throughout his career. I think he's shaping up. Obviously, he has a chance to win Rookie of the Year, which is crazy for a wide receiver. Has just really flourished. But beyond that, you're seeing a lot of good things here. Increased Minnesota passing volume. Same thing I mentioned here without Dalvin Cook in the lineup. I think the same thing I mentioned with Kirk Cousins, the reasons I liked him, is just going to directly relate to Justin Jefferson. You're going to see the ball thrown a lot more by Kirk Cousins. More volume means more targets, means more opportunity for the wide receivers. That all plays into Justin Jefferson's play here. Good wide receiver quarterback matchup according to Pro Football Focus at plus 20%. So he's in a good spot regardless of who he's matched up against. And then the numbers here. The numbers for the season are just astronomical for a rookie receiver. 2.6 yards per route run. That's 3rd overall in the NFL. You're talking players like who? I think Devontae Adams is ahead of him, and maybe Tyreek Hill. That's crazy. Just those 2 guys. And you have him at 2.6 just behind those 2. I believe that's those 2. But regardless, Justin Jefferson 3rd in the NFL with a 2.6 yards per route run average. He's getting 25% of Minnesota's target share, and he has 35% of their team air yards. So what does that mean? He's getting a lot of targets. Those targets are good targets, and they're downfield. He's not just getting some dinks and dunks. He's actually getting targets that matter and that give him an opportunity to really go off in terms of fantasy football. And then the matchup, everything I talked about with Kirk Cousins applies here. Detroit secondary is dead last according to Pro Football Focus in their grading system, and Detroit allows the absolute most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So Justin Jefferson in an excellent spot this week, along with basically everyone in that Minnesota passing attack. The other guy I want to mention here is Brandon Cooks. I do like Deshaun Watson this week. I didn't give him as a main core play, but I will mention him at the end of the video. And obviously with him comes receivers, and Brandon Cooks definitely stands out as the receiver I want with Deshaun Watson, and a guy I'm interested in stand alone here at $6,900 on DraftKings. His price has come up a little bit here. He's not expensive, but he's definitely not cheap anymore, and he's $7,300 on FanDuel. He's playing at home versus Tennessee with a 56 over-under. Houston is a big, I would say a pretty decent home underdog here at plus 7.5 with a 24.3 implied team total. Now this guy does still offer value at his price tag, even though the price has come up, and he offers value with elite numbers, and that's what we're looking at. We want to save some money here, and we want to find receivers in good spots and guys that have the numbers to support the potential to go off, and Brandon Cooks is one of those guys here. It's a potential shootout, highest over-under game on the entire slate. We basically see Tennessee every single week. Their defense gives up a ton of points, and their offense scores a ton of points. If you remember back to that Cleveland game, it was insane that Tennessee nearly came back and won that game, and it was like a 55-50 game in the end. It was crazy. It was like a college max scoring game. But in general, we want those types of games for daily fantasy football. We want those games for fantasy football in general if you have players from them. So we're going to try to target that game here and hope that Tennessee's defense gives up a lot of points and this game turns into a potential shootout, and Brandon Cooks would be one of the best beneficiaries from a game like that. So some of the things I do want to mention here, since week 13, basically the last quarter of this season, Brandon Cooks' numbers have gone up. Obviously, Will Fuller has not been playing. He's suspended for the rest of the season. And basically, since that suspension, you see Cooks just kind of inching up here into some elite territory. He has 23% of the team's target share. Really, really good number there. Nearly a quarter of the targets from the team, from Deshaun Watson, going to Cooks. He has 34% of the team air yards, a really, really elite number there. And then he's basically playing on 95% of the dropbacks for Deshaun Watson. The dude's not coming off the field. There's really no one else to throw the ball to except for Brandon Cooks, and Deshaun Watson has been feeding him the ball a lot. So we want to go there. We want to attack those numbers at his salary. And then some of the other things that we do mention typically with receivers, he's in a plus matchup. We're not looking at a negative matchup here. It's only plus 9%, but nonetheless is a positive wide receiver cornerback matchup. And then Tennessee, I talked about them being a team that gives up a lot. And in terms of wide receivers, they give up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So again, we want to exploit that here. Brandon Cooks is the guy I want to get exposure to, both with a Watson stack, but also I am willing to go there standalone wide receiver. And then in terms of our tight ends, I want to start with Mark Andrews. He is my favorite pairing with Lamar Jackson, the first quarterback we mentioned. He is $5,800 on DraftKings, $72 on FanDuel. Certainly not the cheapest tight end. I do like to typically spend down at the tight end position, but this week is an exception. When you go with Lamar Jackson, I like to go with Mark Andrews. He's playing on the road here in Cincinnati, 44 over under. Baltimore, a huge favorite at minus 13 with a 28.8 implied team total. Again, pair him with Lamar Jackson's stack. They're two just go hand in hand, basically. He's coming off an 11 target game versus the Giants, and in that game he also had 3 red zone targets. So we're starting to get back to that Mark Andrews we know, a guy that gets a good bit of targets, gets high value targets, gets red zone targets from Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson loves going his way, and we hopefully will ride that train through the end of this season here in week 17. I mentioned high value targets. That's definitely something that Mark Andrews gets. Even with a minimum amount of targets, the dude still gets a ton of yards when he gets his receptions. If you take, for example, he's had a minimum of 61 receiving yards in each of the last 5 games. So look back to those game logs, you can see even in games where he's only had 4 or 5 receptions, he's still getting 20 yards per reception. It's crazy numbers that this guy gets. Lamar Jackson and him really have a good connection. I do like to go his way. I think it's a safe, consistent play at the tight end position. The upside hasn't been there this year. He hasn't scored a ton of touchdowns. We'd like to see that bump up here in week 17, maybe get a couple of scores, but in general, it's still a safe play in my opinion. And then the numbers, in terms of a tight end, are really, really good. He's basically a wide receiver, 24% of the team's target share. He has 28% of the team's air yards. It's a plus matchup according to Pro Football Focus in terms of tight ends at plus 15%. And then Cincinnati, they give up the 6th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. So certainly a cake matchup versus Cincinnati in general, but it's also, in terms of a tight end matchup, a great one here versus the Bengals. So I do like Mark Andrews. I like pairing him. I probably am not playing him standalone, to be fully transparent here. It's only going to be with Lamar Jackson, but he's definitely a tight end I am interested in this week. A guy that I am interested in, though, standalone is Evan Ingram. I think his price tag just just isn't going anywhere, and I want to keep taking advantage of it. He's $3,700 on DraftKings, 54 on FanDuel, playing at home versus Dallas, 44.5 over under. The Giants are it's basically a pick'em game, but they are a slight underdog at plus 1.5 with a 21.5 implied team total. Basically, this is a value play, and it's a value play for a guy that has elite talent. He offers a lot of value at the position. The Giants still are playing for something. If the Washington Redskins lose, the Giants still have a chance to win the division with a win over the Dallas Cowboys here and basically go to the playoffs. So they are playing for something here. Evan Ingram is a big mainstay weapon for the Giants. For Daniel Jones. I like Evan Ingram basically every single week at his lower price tags, especially on DraftKings. We're going right back here this week. The last quarter of the season, the volume and opportunity have increased for him. You see him with a 25% team target share. He's also getting 23% of the team's air yards. Now, I'm not saying this guy's Kelsey. I'm not saying he's getting Waller numbers, but I'm saying he's $3,700 and he's getting a quarter of the team's target shares in a game they must win. So I do want to go there with Evan Ingram at that price tag. I think it offers a ton of value. And if he gets into the end zone, if he gets 10 targets, he can really blow through that salary and give us a ton of value and really help our lineups here. And then just if you want to talk about Dallas in general, their secondary is not good. We've seen them get torched all season long. Their defense is just really bad in general. We've seen teams go down the middle against them, which is obviously Evan Ingram playing the tight end position. He's going to be more inside, but their secondary, according to Pro Football Focus, Dallas's secondary is graded 26 overall. So basically a bottom 5 team in the NFL. Definitely something we can and will take advantage of here at his price tag. And so that really wraps up the main core plays. Obviously, I only gave you 2 at every position there. It's simply because there's a lot of moving parts going into Week 17. Those are players that we know will be playing. Those are players that we can safely put into our lineups and know that they likely, more than likely, will finish the game, play all 4 quarters. I mean, if they bust, they bust, but it's not because we didn't pay attention and we're not taking players that are in spots that should continue to play all game. We're going to take advantage of what we know and who's playing in relevant games, and those are the core plays we gave. Now, other players here, though. I mentioned I like 4 quarterbacks this week. The other 2 I like are Aaron Rodgers. I believe the guy has, A, they can lock down the number 1 seed in the NFC. That gives them a bye, all that good stuff. B, the dude is running for MVP, and I believe he's going to throw a couple touchdowns. He's going to put his stamp on the MVP. You know it's going to go to Davante Adams, but Aaron Rodgers definitely in play this week. Deshaun Watson, I talked about him and Brandon Cooks. I do really like Deshaun Watson this week. I believe the coach for them has come out and say Deshaun Watson's going to play all game long, so it is a safe play there. The dude has been really good, even though the Houston Texans have been really bad. I do like Deshaun Watson as my 4th quarterback. Derrick Henry, you're going to see the most ownership of any player on this slate go to Derrick Henry this week. I think it's a good pivot to go off of him with A.J. Brown and other things or other players from that game. But in general, if you're playing cash games, Derrick Henry is a great play this week. Obviously, if you want to get some leverage, you need to go somewhere else probably in tournaments, but in general, he still is in a smash spot. He's probably going to get a ton of carries, have multiple chances in the red zone to score. David Montgomery has been on absolute fire for the Chicago Bears. Green Bay does give up a ton on the ground. That's their weakness on defense, so David Montgomery is in play this week. So is Melvin Gordon. Phillip Lindsay has been out, probably still is out this week. Melvin Gordon has actually looked pretty good. I mean, that's why they paid this guy. I don't understand why they haven't used him more throughout the season, but in general, his price tag's low. I do like Melvin Gordon as a value running back play. Some actual real value running back plays are going to be Ty Montgomery and Alexander Madison. Both of these guys are filling in for either injured guys being out, guys being rested, or simply COVID. So take advantage of those if you need to, if you need the salary. I'm still worried about both of them. Ty Montgomery has not played a full workload at running back, and then Alexander Madison did not look good the last time he started in place of Dalvin Cook. So just keep in mind, they've busted before and can do it again this week in Week 17. But those are clearly the industry value plays at running back this week. Davante Adams, if you're playing Aaron Rodgers, you have to play Davante Adams. The dude catches like 17 touchdowns a game. All the records in the world are being set by these guys. So Davante Adams obviously in play for Green Bay. I mentioned A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is a great pivot, in my opinion, off of Derrick Henry's ownership. I do really like A.J. Brown this week for Tennessee. Adam Thielen, I talked about him a little bit earlier with Justin Jefferson. Both guys in play. Both can be stacked and should be stacked with Kirk Cousins. Jerry Jeudy is another guy I have interested in this week at some lower ownership, lower salary, wide receiver for Denver. I think he's starting to come into his own. A lot of drops for this guy, but, I mean, don't focus on that yet. I don't know if that's actually his MO. I mean, if he turns a lot of those into catches, then we have a completely different price tag on this guy this week. But in general, Jerry Jeudy, really good receiver, really good young receiver for Denver in play. Emmanuel Sanders, I mentioned basically every running back is out for the New Orleans Saints. Well, Emmanuel Sanders is probably going to see some usage this week, if you ask me. I think he's going to get a lot of those intermediate, shallow targets just to get the ball out of Drew Brees' hand. I like him this week for sure. And then Marquise Brown pairing somebody else with Lamar Jackson outside of Mark Andrews would be Marquise Brown. So that wraps up the other highlights. Hopefully those core plays are helpful. Hopefully these other plays are helpful. I'd love to hear from you guys. Leave me some comments if I've missed anybody, if any other values are opening up, or simply if I'm just off on any of these plays. Please let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Please check out Daily Fantasy Nerd. The optimizer is linked down below. You get 1 week for free by clicking the affiliate link. So if you're ever going to use it for football, well, this would be the week 17. It's been an excellent tool, has helped me all season long. Definitely would not have had a successful season without that optimizer. It's very good in my opinion. So check it out, Daily Fantasy Nerd. It has the NBA stuff up now. If you're into NBA, you can definitely use that optimizer for NBA projections. Use it for setting lineups, multiple entries, all that good stuff. Link down below, affiliate link. It does help out the channel. I would really appreciate it. And hey, for those of you that have made it this far into the video, I have good news. We're doing a giveaway. $100 subscriber giveaway. A big thank you giveaway for essentially being a part of this channel, being a part of 2020 NFL DFS No Huddle Fantasy Sports, all that good stuff, all that jazz. I didn't make mention of this. This kind of was a last minute decision. I wanted to make sure at some point this year I was going to do some sort of giveaway for all the support that this channel has gotten, all the subscribers, all the likes, all the comments, all the basically participation and people that have taken the time to listen to my nonsense here on the channel. I wanted to give a big thank you giveaway. And so that's what we're doing here. And so if you've lasted this long into the video, congratulations. It's very simple. I'm giving away $100 split 4 ways. So $25 risk-free. I'm simply just going to send you $25, however you want me to send it to you. The only stipulations, and this is how it's going to work, you have to be subscribed to this channel, No Huddle Fantasy Sports YouTube. You have to make sure you like this particular video, the Week 17 NFL DFS Playbook video. Make sure you give it a like. And then down in this particular video's comment section, leave a comment as to which week in 2020 NFL DFS was your favorite week or your best week. Whatever week was basically the week for you in 2020 NFL DFS, leave me a comment down below. We don't need any details. Feel free to provide them if you want to. But in general, just leave me a comment as to which week was your favorite, and I will take the very first 4 people that meet those 3 things and send you $25. That simple. I just want to make sure I give something back to the community here. It's been an absolutely wonderful season. 2020 NFL DFS obviously has been, I wouldn't say a struggle. NFL season has been weird with COVID and all of the different movement and all of the different things, but we've been so good on the channel here as a community, as a participation, as kind of putting out the news that we need to know that this has been a very, if not my most successful NFL season in terms of DFS. It's been excellent. The picks have been great, and we've been dominating week in and week out. So again, I want to make sure I give you guys a little bit back here, make sure the community knows that I do really appreciate you guys staying in tune with these videos, participating, giving them likes, making sure you're subscribed, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. So simply make sure you are subscribed, like the video, leave that comment down below as to which week so far in 2020 was your best week for NFL DFS, and I will make sure I send you $25 if you are one of the first 4 people. So again, thank you guys so much. I know I say it a million times in these videos, but I truly am grateful for everything you guys do for this channel, making sure you're subscribed or following the links or checking out Daily Fantasy Nerd. I do really appreciate it. So again, thank you guys so much. Make sure you get a part of this. Make sure you're part of the giveaway. And with all of that said, we are officially at the end of this video here. We're officially at the end of Week 17, the final week of the NFL season. content here at No Huddle Fantasy Sports in terms of regular NFL DFS content. Thank you guys so much for, as always, tuning into these videos, following along here. I wish you guys the best of luck in Week 17 DFS, the best of luck tomorrow, this upcoming Sunday, whether you're playing DraftKings or FanDuel. And of course, I wish you the best of luck in terms of winning some actual cash here, $25. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will catch you in the next video.